Hello again, theory students. As I do this recording, today is Monday, March 30th. And before I start the lecture, I would like to let you know that I do have a lot of your, in fact, I have all of your work that you sent me graded. And I do plan to somehow get that in the mail to send to you so that you can receive it sometime this week. So please keep an eye out later this week for some mail, which would include your graded homework. Today I'd like to talk to you about some triads, some chords that is, that are not used very frequently in music. I call these chords less common chords, and one of these less common chords comes from the major mode, and the rest of these less common chords come from the minor mode. So let's take a look at what specific triads I'm talking about. These triads, again, are not used frequently at all in music. As I said, in the major mode, or in major keys, one of the less common chords that we have not talked about yet and how to use in a progression is the 3 chord. And in minor keys, several chords that we have not talked about yet as to how to use in a progression, how to use correctly in tonal music, are the 3 chord, the minor 5 chord, and the major 7 chord. Again, these chords are very infrequent. They're not very common. We don't see them a lot in music, but they do exist. And so I feel that we should know a little bit about how to use them in a progression. Really, all the chords that I have here on the board are used specifically in just a few ways. So if you can remember the ways that I talk about and discuss in the lecture today, you should be well prepared for knowing how to use these chords and how to spell them and part write them and use them on a quiz or a test. Before I get into talking about how to use these chords in a progression, it's always good to go back to major and minor scales to see where these chords come from. How do we get these chords? How are they derived and generated? So starting with the major mode, I have a C major scale notated up here on the screen. And again, just using the notes of my C major scale, I have constructed or built a triad on scale degree 3, which in RL Skills class we know as the solfege syllable Mi. The triad I get on scale degree 3 in major keys happens to be a minor triad. It is E, G, B in the key of C major, and that is a minor triad, and so the Roman numeral to label the 3 chord in any major key is a lowercase Roman numeral 3. Now on the board here, I have a C natural minor scale. You may recall from Theory 1 that the majority, 90% of the chords that we get in minor actually are derived and come from the harmonic minor scale. The only one that doesn't come completely from the harmonic minor scale is the chord on scale degree 3. And the chord on scale degree 3 comes from, technically, the natural form of the minor scale. So what I have here on the board, as I said, is a natural minor scale. because the less common chords that occur in minor keys, that is the 3 chord, the 5 chord, and the 7 chord, those less common chords are all derived from the natural form of the minor scale. So you can see if I use just the notes of the natural form of the minor scale, which includes scale degrees 6 and 7, both of which are in their lowered state or lowered versions, the chord I get on scale degree 3 is E flat, G, and B flat in the key of C minor, and that happens to be a major triad. So in minor keys, the 3 chord is always labeled with a capital or uppercase Roman numeral 3. The 5 chord that we get from the natural minor scale happens to be a very rare chord. And the 5 chord in this case, in this key, is G, B flat, D, which turns out to be a minor triad. And again, this is used only maybe 2% of the time in all of music. We normally use the capital or major 5 chord that comes from the harmonic minor scale. But this is a rare chord, and so we're focusing on it today. And the minor 5 chord comes from the natural minor scale. It is a minor triad, and so the Roman numeral just for this rare, less common chord is a lowercase Roman numeral 5. We will be using this Roman numeral only for the next few classes. We will be using it very sparingly, and after the next test, we will probably not use minor 5 ever again. Finally, the other rare or less common chord that we can get from the notes of the natural minor scale is the major 7 chord. Now, this chord on scale degree 7 is major because I have used lowered scale degree 7 as the chord's root. In this key of C minor, I've used B flat as the root, not the leading tone of B natural. Okay. If I use the leading tone B natural, what I would get is I would get our typical diminished 7 chord, for example, if I used the leading tone or B natural, my 7 would be a diminished triad. And we are used to that. Diminished 7s occur normally in both major and minor keys. But because I'm using the lowered 7th scale degree to generate this chord, I am not using the leading tone. I am using what is called the subtonic. And in terms of aural skills, that note is te, or lowered scale degree 7. And because I've lowered the root, I have now a major triad, B flat, D, and F. And again, the capital 7 chord is rare, not found very often in music, but we're going to learn a little bit how it is used. So let's go back and discuss now the proper uses and the proper ways to use these less common chords. In tonal music, the 3 chord in major keys is not used very often at all, as I've said before. When scale degree 3, or Mi, is found in the bass, the chord above that note is almost always a 1/6. Rather than a 3 chord. For example, if I am in the key of C, and, well, actually, let me give you a bass line here instead of a treble line, and my bass line actually goes in the key of C, something like C and E, and then F, and then G. 9 times out of 10, the chord above scale degree 3 here in the bass, or Mi, is going to be a 1/6. One 6 is much more common as a triad when we have scale degree 3 as the lowest sounding pitch in a musical texture. But today, of course, we are focusing on the rarities, and that is, we're going to assume now, at least for the next few classes, that when we have scale degree 3 in the bass, the chord harmonized with that, or the chord above it, is actually going to be the rarer, more or less common minor 3 chord, rather than the 1/6. Okay. Now, when the 3 chord is used, it acts as a predominant chord, typically moving or progressing to a 6, a 4, or a 2 chord. So again, the 3 triad, its function, even though it officially doesn't occur on our tonal function circle chart that we have discussed already, the 3 chord most often acts as a predominant. That means it is a chord that generally comes right before a normal predominant chord. And we know that our regular predominant chords are 6, 4, and 2. So if you wanted to look at it in terms of its use and function in our circle tonal function chart, I have reproduced a little bit of that chart right here with the 3 main functions, tonic, predominant, and dominant. And where on this circle would I place the 3 chord? Well, I would place it here in parentheses. It's not an official function for a chord, the predominant function, but it usually comes after tonic and comes before your normal or your regular predominant. So in that case, you can think of it at least, or regard it as what I call a predominant. Comes before the normal predominant chords. Alright, so that gives us a little bit of information of how the 3 chord behaves in terms of a progression. Let's get a little more specific now. Specifically, the 3 chord is used in 2 ways. 2 ways, and it's used in these 2 ways correctly in tonal music. Number 1, it is used as a way to harmonize the melody note T in a descending stepwise soprano line. So let's say, for instance, I had the soprano line that went Do, Ti, La, Sol. Descending stepwise line, and we're going to pretend that these notes of a key are in the top voice, the soprano voice. Well, we can see from this example here on the board that the 3 chord includes the pitches Mi and Sol and Ti. So if we have Ti in one of the upper voices in a texture, a musical texture, we could harmonize Ti with a 3 chord underneath. And in order to give you maybe a better picture of how this works, I'm going to show you a handout on the screen here, which I will also give you through Canvas, and I hope that you will refer to this handout as you listen to the remainder of this lecture. You may either print out the handout and follow along, or you may just open the handout in another window on your screen and refer to that as I talk about the rest of these chords. So I just finished saying that the 3 chord is used one specific way out of the 2 specific ways it is used. The first specific way is to harmonize a descending stepwise soprano line. And I have a short progression here in the key of C major. And you'll notice that the soprano line, at least in the first measure, is descending and it is stepwise. It starts with the tonic pitch do, and it walks down stepwise, do, ti, la, sol. When you have a descending soprano line, that is a descending line in the highest voice, T in that descending soprano line, or scale degree 7, that can be harmonized with a 3 chord. And that is one of the very good uses for using a 3 chord, and so I have used that in this example. Notice that in this progression here, as the 3 harmonizes T or scale degree 7 in the soprano voice, be aware and please note what it moves to. 3 in this case moves to a 4 chord. And as we know, 4 chord is a regular predominant chord. So 3 is behaving just as it should in terms of the functions of the progression. Let me go ahead and turn the lights on briefly so I can see what I'm playing and play this example for you at the piano. In C major. It is in this instance that the 3 chord is, when it is used, again, it is oftentimes heard in this context. Again, harmonizing a descending stepwise soprano line. One particular example that you may be familiar with, I will show on the screen now. For example, the opening chords of the familiar tune Puff the Magic Dragon happen to be these right here. 1, 3, 4, and then instead of dominant or 5, it goes back to 1. Notice again that the 3 moves to a regular predominant, so it is acting as a predominant. And also you might be able to hear that one of the notes in the melody over the 3 chord is T or scale degree 7. The second main way that the 3 chord is used is it's used to precede another predominant, namely the 6 chord, in a what's called a descending fifth or a circle progression. If I were to write a progression that contained a 3 chord in it pretty early on, and after the 3 chord I wrote what's called a descending fifth root movement or a circle progression, what that means is that any chord whose root is a fifth lower than the previous chord would come next in a succession of harmonies. So if we think about the 3 chord in the key of C, for instance, the root is E. If we were to go down a fifth from E, we would get the pitch A. And the pitch A would be the root of a 6 chord. And if we go down a fifth from the pitch A, we would get the pitch D. So the next chord would be a 2 chord because it has a root of D. And if we were to go down a fifth from the root D, we would get the pitch G, which would support a 5 chord. And if we went down a fifth from G, we would get the note C, which would support a 1 chord. And any time you have a succession of chords whose roots are a fifth lower than the preceding chord's root, you have what's called a circle progression. In the circle progression, the 3 chord will always move to the 6 chord because the root of the 6 chord is a fifth lower than the root of the 3 chord. So the second way to use the 3 chord properly in music is to move it to a 6 chord. You can see in the last 2 measures here that I have 1, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. The circle progression starts with the 3 chord, moves to the 6, then to the 2, then to the 5, and to the 1. So the second way to use the 3 chord properly is to move it to a 6 chord. And that would be what's called a circle progression or a descending fifth root movement. Please also note and be aware that the 6th chord is a regular predominant. So once again, the 3 chord is acting, even in this case, as a predominant when it moves to 6. In minor keys, we had mentioned that the 3 chord is major, uppercase 3, capital 3. And really the use of the major 3 chord in minor keys is almost identical to the use of the 3 chord in major keys. For instance, one of the 2 ways to use the major 3 chord in a minor key correctly is again to harmonize a descending stepwise soprano line. Notice that when we're in minor, however, the soprano line is not do, ti, la, sol, but rather do, te, le, sol. And once again, the scale degree 7 in the minor key, in this case te, is harmonized by the capital 3 chord. We can see here that the 3 chord, it could go to a 4 chord, but in this case I've decided to use another regular predominant, and that is a 2 chord, happens to be in first inversion. So 3 can go to 6, to 4, or to 2, usually 2 in first inversion. And let me go ahead and play this passage at the piano so you can hear it in the minor mode. The second and final way that the major 3 chord in minor keys can be used is just like the minor 3 chord in the major keys again. And that is the 3 chord moves to a 6 chord in a circle progression. So we can see in this example here that we have the Roman numerals in the order 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. It does not matter that the 2 chord is inverted, because the root of the 2 chord is still a fifth lower than the root of the 6 chord. At any rate, we're mostly concerned with this portion, 3 moving to 6, a regular predominant, and in this case the 3, as in the other case 2, is acting as a predominant. And I'll go ahead and play this short progression for you as well. Really the only difference that I think is worth mentioning between the major 3 chord and the minor 3 chord is that the major 3 chord is perhaps used a little bit more often than the minor 3 chord. In minor keys, music tends to drift into the direction of the relative major key. and the relative major key can be seen to be represented by the 3 chord. And if you don't understand that, that's perfectly fine. I guess you don't need to know that. But the capital 3 chord in minor is used a little bit more than the minor 3 chord in major keys. The last thing I want to mention about the 3 chord before I move on to the other less common chords is this. When you use a 3 chord, whether it's in a minor key or a major key, I always want you to write and use the 3 chord in root position. Root position. We do not use 3 chords in any inversion. They are not normally found in inversion. When they are found, it is normally root position. Also, the last thing I want to say about 3 chords is when you part write 3 chords, please double the root or the bass, since they will be in root position. It's saying the same thing. In both of these examples, I have the root E flat doubled. You can see E flat in the bass and E flat in the tenor, and the same thing in this progression, E flat in the bass and E flat in the tenor. The doubling does not have to be in the tenor voice, of course, but I would just like you, if you need to part write a 3 chord, to double the root. Let's talk a little bit about the proper way to use the capital 7 chord, whose root is te. There are 2 main ways to use this chord properly. I am not going to talk about a function on our circular tonal function chart for the 7 or for the minor 5 chord. They really don't have a good function. Oftentimes what they serve as is they just serve kind of a passing function. But we don't call them P chords for passing because we never use these chords in second inversion. Okay. So the major 7 chord is used correctly in tonal music in 2 main ways. The first correct way that a capital or major 7 chord is used, and by the way, we're always in minor keys when the 7 is capital or major. The first way it is used properly is to use it in first inversion. That is to write capital 7 with a 6 next to it to indicate first inversion. And a 7/6 chord harmonizes an ascending bass line. Now, in my experience, students tend to start getting confused here because when we talked about using the 3 chords, they are always used to harmonize a descending soprano line. But the 7/6 chord is, in this case, used to harmonize the opposite. That is, an ascending bass line. If you look at this first example, you'll see the bass line goes up by step, do, re, mi, fa, sol. If you want to look back at the scale that I had on the other screen, you will indeed find that the third of a capital 7 chord in any key is scale degree 2, or re. So when re is on the bottom, that places the 7 chord in first inversion. Remember, the root of this chord is te, but the third of the chord is re. So re on the bottom means first inversion. And it turns out I can harmonize this ascending stepwise bass line with these Roman numerals, or with these chords. 1, 7 diminished 6, 3, minor 4, and capital or major 5. You will notice that when the first inversion capital 7 chord is used, in this ascending bass line, with this ascending bass line, you'll notice that it is always going to move to a capital 3 chord. We talked about capital 3 chords before. And this capital 3 chord as it should, is going to a normal or regular predominant chord. So one of the short progressions that I'm going to want you to memorize for the next test is that when you have an ascending bass line, do, re, mi, fa, sol, that you harmonize those notes with these exact chords in these exact bass positions. 1, 7, 6, 3, minor 4, major 5. Let's listen to what that progression sounds like. The only other way the major 7 chord is used correctly is in root position to harmonize a descending bass line. Okay. Again, this perhaps adds a little more to the confusion. Am I talking about ascending stepwise lines, descending stepwise lines? Am I talking about soprano voices or bass voices? Well, in root position, the major 7 chord harmonizes a descending bass line. And that is because in minor keys, the descending bass line will go do, te, le, sol. Notice when we have te in the bass, that is very appropriate then to harmonize te in the bass or to use the chord capital 7. So when you have do, te, le, sol in the bass, a descending stepwise bass line, this is another progression I'd like you to memorize. Harmonize these notes in the bass with these chords. 1, capital 7, minor 4, 6, capital 5. Once again, 1, capital 7, minor 4, 6, and 5, capital 5. Let's listen to that progression. Sorry, let's start that one over again. Last but not least, let's discuss the proper way to use the minor 5 chord, which is again always going to occur and appear in a minor key, never in a major key. You might be happy to know that there is only one way to use the minor 5 chord correctly in tonal music. Notice that the pitches of the minor 5 chord are sol for the root, te for the 3rd of the chord, and then re for the 5th of the chord. So the only way to use a minor 5 chord correctly in tonal music is to use it in first inversion. First inversion, that is the Roman numeral lowercase 5 with a 6. And when you use the minor 5 chord in first inversion, it works, it harmonizes the descending bass line that we just talked about for the root position 7 chord. In fact, you can say that whenever you have a descending bass line, do, te, le, sol, or do, te, le, sol, for the chord that's built on te in the bass, you can either use capital 7 in root position or the minor 5 chord in first inversion. A minor 5 chord in first inversion will have te in the bass, the lowest sounding voice. Okay. So once again, the minor 5-6 is very closely related to the root position major 7 chord, They're used in the same context, that is to harmonize a descending stepwise bass line. In this example here with the minor 5-6, I have the progression 1, minor 5-6, minor 4-6, capital 5 for the cadence. Remember, we always use capital 5s at cadences and usually throughout music. This is the only time that we use a minor 5 chord. We use it in first inversion to harmonize a descending bass line. One thing I also want to point out is that the progression that includes the root position capital 7 is identical to this progression except for the substituted less common chord, capital 7 or minor 5 in first inversion. And so that means that we can conclude that a minor 5-6 must go to a minor 4-6 because it's part of this descending stepwise bass line. Minor 5-6 does not progress or move to any other chord except for minor 4-6. Now you may wonder, well, how can a 5 chord go to a 4 chord? Because I thought you told us, Dr. Hawkinson, that dominant chords cannot go to predominant chords. Well, that is correct. Dominant chords cannot go to predominant chords. However, the minor 5 chord, because it does not have T in the chord, but rather Te, the minor 5 chord does not possess dominant function. In fact, the minor 5 chord is completely different than the capital 5 chord. They do not behave the same way, they are not similar, they do not function in the same way. The minor 5 chord is a completely different animal than the capital or major 5 chord. And we have learned the one way to use the minor 5 chord properly. In first inversion, harmonizing a descending bass line, progressing or moving to a minor 4-6. Let's listen to this progression now on the piano. What I would like to do next is play this progression with the descending bass line that uses root position capital 7, and then play the same progression with the descending bass line, but that uses a minor 5-6 instead, so you can hear the slight difference. So this is the progression with the root position capital 7. Now this is the progression at the bottom with the minor 5-6. As I mentioned earlier in this lecture, especially the 7-6, the root position 7, and the minor 5-6, they tend to be used and they tend to behave as passing chords. You can see the passing motion in the bass surrounding all of these. But again, we don't call them P chords of any kind because they're never used in second inversion. Some of them are used in first inversion, some of them are used in root position, but never in second inversion, so we do not refer to them as P chords. We still use their regular Roman numeral to analyze them. Now, the last thing I want to say is when you have to part write a minor 5-6 chord, there is no official doubling rule for the minor 5-6 chord. In other words, you may double any pitch that in the chord that you find facilitates or brings about the smoothest voice leading. Let me go ahead and raise this example a little bit so you can see it a little clearer, and then I'll show you what I have doubled in this progression. Perhaps you can see that I have in this 5/6 chord, I have doubled the bass note, which is B flat. You see a B flat in the bass and a B flat in the tenor. I could have doubled the G of the chord or the D of the chord, but I think doubling the bass, in my case, the way this is part written, has given me the smoothest possible voice leading for all of the voices. Be careful when you part write minor 5/6 chords and going to minor 4/6 chords, which they will. They have to. You got to be careful because you're in a minor key, and especially when 4/6 goes to 5, be careful not to write melodic augmented seconds in any of the voices. And also remember in minor 4/6 chords, I should say, first inversion, we want to avoid doubling the bass for the minor 4/6. Now this discussion may have been a little bit longer than you were hoping for, but because we don't have to go through homework here, or I cannot address questions in real time, I like to take the extra time to explain this thoroughly. What I'm going to give you for your assignment through Canvas is a handout, and I would like you to complete that handout based on my discussion here and on the in-class sheet that I will be giving you in Canvas, this sheet right here. Using that information, go ahead and complete the homework assignment, and I'll have that homework assignment be due on Wednesday this week. So that is going to conclude my lecture for today. Hopefully it'll make sense to you. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. I will try to respond in a timely manner, or please feel free to call me. My number is 402-375-7362. Once again, 402-375-7362. That is my office number. So until next time, have a good week, and I'll look forward to receiving your homework assignment later this week.